Hi friends, I'm Ginger, and we're going to talk about a difficult subject today. I wish I had talked about Christians and abortion a long time ago, because it is so painful, divisive, and controversial. People don't want to talk about it. It's hard to listen to someone who has a different perspective, or have a respectful and constructive conversation. I will try my best, but I am worried that by talking about this at all, people are going to, by accident or on purpose, misunderstand me. That is frustrating. I want to make the best of assumptions about people who disagree with me. I hope you can give me grace when I slip up too. Some of you may have had personal or painful experiences that have perhaps influenced where you're landing on this subject. In America, 1 in 4 folks who are capable of getting pregnant have an abortion at some point in their lifetimes. If not you, people who are close to you have had an abortion. Maybe they don't talk about it. Also, at least 1 in 4 pregnancies end in miscarriage, a spontaneous ending to a pregnancy. That can be a taboo subject as well. It impacts people differently, and early miscarriage might just seem like a period, and you may not even have known you were pregnant. A later miscarriage may need medical intervention, and it might break your heart with lost hopes. Whatever your history may be, your story is important. I hope the best for you and that you get the compassion and support that you need. I didn't know these numbers when I first learned about abortion. I was raised to be pro-life. I was taught that the pro-life movement and Christianity were tied together. If you're a Christian, you are pro-life. But this was quickly contradicted. In middle school, 2 of my best friends had different political beliefs than I did. They said, it's not murder, it's a personal choice, and I'm not going to tell other people what to do with their bodies. That was confusing and frustrating for me. I knew, of course, that my friends didn't lack morals or support murder, yet it made me so uncomfortable, I set it aside rather than dealing with it. Now, I don't expect middle schoolers to have all the answers to complicated subjects or to have a full understanding of things. But as an adult, I try to think about this more deeply. As an adult, I found out that Protestant Christians only became pro-life recently, years after Roe versus Wade legalized abortion in the US. Protestant refers to Christians who aren't Catholic. This was a new perspective for most Christians. Before then, they believed there were various medical and personal reasons for abortion, and it shouldn't be part of politics. Since then, it's become one of the most important issues in conservative politics. I want to illustrate a spectrum of beliefs. There's a line, and on one side we've got a person saying no abortions ever, any circumstance. And on the other side, there's a person saying abortion is always fine, any circumstance. At first, we imagine that everyone is on either far side, and it can feel that way when we're yelling at each other. But honestly, I think most people are in the middle. People are saying, I don't like abortion, but there's some circumstances that make sense. Or someone saying, I wouldn't get one personally, but I'm not going to tell someone else what to do. Or someone else saying, this is against my religion, but I don't want to force other people to practice my religious beliefs. When I was in middle school, I may have been on the far right side because I hadn't really thought about it. No one had given me any examples for why someone might really need an abortion or reasonably want one, and I didn't see any room for complexity. But at some point I met other people. I heard other people's stories. One story gave me a new perspective. I feel a little nervous sharing this, and I'm going to be very vague about it on purpose. It is not my story to share. And the people this story belonged to probably wouldn't like how it changed my perspective. I am sorry. When I was an adult, I saw an old high school friend on Facebook. She had just found out that something was really wrong with her pregnancy. The kind of wrong that meant if her baby were born alive, they would only live for a few days at most. I was far away from my old friend, and we didn't keep in touch. But I read every detail of her story, followed every update. She was happily married, a firm believer, and pro-life. They chose to continue the pregnancy. The couple did their best to celebrate their time with their unborn baby, viewing that time as short and precious. I feel guilty saying how much I cried over these updates. Obviously, my secondhand pain is small compared to what the hopeful parents were going through. They did an amazing job of loving and grieving their child. I'm so happy that they got to make the choice that was right for them. But when I imagined being in their shoes, I had to admit to myself I would have made a different choice. I would not continue a pregnancy that would end in death. And the thought of being forced to carry that pregnancy, of having no choice, was deeply upsetting. This moved me to a different spot on the line. I don't think someone should be forced to carry a pregnancy to term that wasn't going to end in life was a sudden new belief for me. I didn't want to move to the left end of the line or even call myself pro-choice, but I had one example where abortion seemed okay. And I suddenly had freedom to consider that there might be other examples, maybe lots of examples. In the years since then, I have read hundreds of stories. I will post links below. I want to share 2 more stories about medical issues. A lot of politicians who support abortion bans like to complain about late-term abortion. They'll suggest that anyone can terminate a pregnancy on a whim up until the moment of birth. This is not true. People don't go through months and months of uncomfortable pregnancy and then suddenly decide to terminate at the last minute. People who have late-term abortions wanted their babies. They picked out tiny clothes, tried to find the perfect name, and decorated nurseries. Something has gone wrong. Not just a little bit wrong, but catastrophically wrong. One woman found out her baby had a very severe form of something called Dandy Walker syndrome. The baby was having seizures all the time, even in the womb. She was trying to research, understand the disease. Was there a cure? Was there something she could do to help her child? She was initially thinking, okay, my child is going to have special needs. What can I do to give them a good life? What kind of education will they need? How do I be a good mom to a person with special needs? But as the pregnancy progressed, it became clear she couldn't give her child a good life. They wouldn't live long, and their short life would be painful. The worst part of the articles was when she asked the doctor if the baby would just sleep all day. The doctor very uncomfortably said, "Babies like this one are generally not comfortable enough to sleep." So the mother decided she wanted to prevent her child from having any more pain. She did what she felt was best for her child, not being selfish about her own needs. Not because she changed her mind about wanting a baby. Not because she wasn't willing to do the hard work of caring for her child's needs. I also read a similar story where the mom's health was at risk. She was carrying twins. One twin had already passed away in utero. The other twin wasn't going to live due to their brain and spinal cord becoming separated from their body. Again, this mom wanted her children, but there was no surgery to save them. Instead, the dead twin was poisoning them both. She had a C-section to remove them. Many people who read her story were angry. They said this wasn't an abortion, even though it was a surgical procedure that ended in the death of a baby. Whether or not outsiders considered it an abortion or considered it moral, it was considered an abortion by the hospital. This happened in Utah to a Mormon mom with Mormon doctors. They wouldn't normally do abortions. They had to gather the hospital's ethics committee and debate whether or not it was okay to get an abortion, whether or not her special circumstances qualified. She also had to ask her religious leaders for permission. She felt terrible guilt that was very hard to overcome. It is very difficult to get a late-term abortion. You may have to travel far, and even finding the rare place that will do it, they have to be persuaded that your special circumstances count. It is very expensive. The state doesn't pay for these abortions. Insurance doesn't cover it. So please take these stories seriously. There's a lot of overlap between abortion care and miscarriage care. Many folks who have miscarriages need a D&C, that's short for dilation and curettage, afterward. That is a surgical procedure where the doctor removes any tissue that's left behind in the uterus. It's the same procedure used in surgical abortions. Tissue like placenta can grow bacteria and cause the body to go septic. Not getting this care can potentially end in death. The token case for miscarriage care happened a decade ago in Ireland. Ireland, a Catholic country, was very pro-life for many years, and their hospitals were pro-life, and if folks wanted an abortion, they literally had to leave the country. There was a woman named Savita Halappanavar. She was very happy about her first pregnancy, but she started to miscarry. She and her husband went to the hospital when the miscarriage was taking a long time. The hospital refused to help her because the fetus still had a heartbeat. Even though the hospital knew there was no help for the baby, their rules were strict. For 3 days, they waited for the fetus's heart to stop beating on its own. Savita began to get sick as her womb turned septic. Finally, the fetus was declared dead and the hospital could treat her. But it was too late. Savita died the next day. This was a major case against the pro-life laws of Ireland. Protesters would carry pictures of Savita and they wrote, "She had a heartbeat too." Because of these pro-life laws, the hospital prioritized the heartbeat of someone they knew was not going to live over someone who was alive, who they could have saved. I think most pro-life people would not be okay with this hospital's negligence. But I hope that you can start to see the problems with pro-life policies. These policies don't take difficult circumstances into consideration. Instead, they create an atmosphere of fear and punishment. I was just reading a story about a Texas mom who desperately wanted to have a baby, but found out things had gone catastrophically wrong and she had to go to New Mexico to end her pregnancy. It seems like the Texas doctors would say, this is a special circumstance, but doctors are afraid they will lose their job or go to jail for doing what's right. A lot of these laws are standing on the far right side of the spectrum and not being willing to see any nuance. They aren't going to protect people. My childhood view was kind of that people who sleep around need to be punished. I guess some people still think that's the most important thing, even if people who follow my morals and do everything right accidentally get punished too. You can't craft a law that only punishes those who you think need to be punished. So I would rather empower people to make good choices. We don't empower people by taking their choices away, by rushing them, or by tricking them. The most common example of policies that don't make sense happened this year. Ohio legislators wanted to ban abortion for ectopic pregnancies. Ectopic pregnancies mean that the embryo has implanted somewhere outside the womb, very commonly in the fallopian tube. Not only is it impossible at this point for the embryo to ever grow into a fetus or a fully born baby, but it's now putting the life of the pregnant person in danger as well. If left untreated, the embryo continues to grow and it will rupture the organ and cause internal bleeding. It's painful. So there needs to be a surgical procedure to remove the embryo and sometimes even the fallopian tube. This should be a clear-cut situation for an exception. Yet, the Ohio politicians wanted to order doctors to reimplant the embryo, a procedure medical science has not invented. An ectopic pregnancy doesn't become a baby. So if you're trying to fight for babies, there's no point fighting for ectopic pregnancies. Again, I am trying so hard not to assume others are malicious. I like to think most people would agree an abortion can be useful or even necessary medical care for the sake of saving someone's life. But there's so many bad examples. There are people in restrictive countries who have been charged with crimes because their miscarriage was suspicious. In fact, folks in the US have gone to jail for allegedly causing their miscarriage. Miscarriages and early term abortions look the same. Can you imagine it? Going through a miscarriage, already an emotional, painful, and messy process. Then the police show up. They want to know what you did. Maybe you already felt guilty. You wonder if you didn't eat healthy enough, accidentally ate a forbidden food, didn't start taking vitamins soon enough, or lifted something too heavy. Well, you're sick and hurting, you get interrogated and maybe arrested. Again, I didn't know these stories when I was a child. I just had one view of a person seeking abortion. She was promiscuous and couldn't be bothered to make good choices. If she decided she wanted an abortion, she was being selfish and lazy. If she were forced to become a mom instead, she'd become a better person and everything would work out. It's easy for a child to believe a single story about how the world works. And it's easy to vote or to make laws when the issue is murder or life. The issues are so much more complicated than that. We've talked about medical conditions, and there's a lot of other issues as well. Lack of support, poverty, raising other kids. All these things make the issue very complicated. There are circumstances where I don't think abortion is okay. I don't agree with a state-forced abortion. When I was a kid, we were always told about the one-child policy in China. Of course, that caused many abortions. Even if the state didn't require an abortion, they were limiting options and pressuring people. Likewise, I don't agree with a romantic partner forcing an abortion, even if that's just through indirect threats. I'm going to leave you penniless by the side of the road, or if it's more extreme, I'm going to hurt you, I'm going to make you miscarry, anything like that. I don't agree with people's parents or guardians forcing them to have an abortion, and I know that some people's jobs basically force them to get abortions. That can't be official or in writing, but it can become an everyone knows sort of situation that your career is over if you get pregnant. Now, I think most pro-choice people would agree with my examples. All these cases have something in common. The decision isn't being made by the person who is actually carrying the pregnancy and being impacted by it the most. Pro-choice isn't about forcing people. My next situation is more complicated. Please give me some time to explain it. There are circumstances where I wish people wouldn't get abortions. It's a preference, not a rule, not something I want to make laws around. I've been giving you a lot of medical examples and stories where a fetus has a condition that makes it incompatible with life. But there are many conditions where children can have full and wonderful lives with disabilities. I understand why parents wouldn't want to raise kids with complicated medical conditions or disabilities. And I still don't want to force someone to do that. It's scary for someone to have to think, I'm going to work 3 jobs to support my family. We'll have to sell everything to pay medical bills. Our schools don't have the resources for these kids. I'll never get to spend quality time with my kid because I'll be so busy just fighting for them to survive. But I think we could empower people to care for kids with special needs better. If someone finds out their child will have a serious disability, but they know they'll have a support system, they will have access to affordable and good medical care. They'll have time away from work to care for their kid. They'll have access for the kid to have good education. They'll know their child will be cared for even after they're gone. I believe a lot of people would be willing. And it's also one of those things where there's a rolling effect. If you see other families who have kids with profound disabilities raising their kids and having a good life, being happy, being supported, you say, oh, if I were in that circumstance, I'd be okay with that too. It's encouraging. A blogger I really like is a mom who is raising a kid with a genetic condition. The child will never have the typical life, but their family firmly believes this child has a life that's worth living. She is contributing something to the world, even if she's not contributing in terms of capitalism, making money or making products. They're grateful that they've gotten to be her parents. They have a good support network. But they lived in the Midwest, and their state did not provide good support for raising a kid with profound disabilities. They were on a long wait list to get Medicare for their child. So they chose to move to New England, where their child got on Medicare immediately and could access all kinds of therapy and resources that hadn't been available to them before. If a child has a lifelong, expensive disability, the family wants security. But states that enact pro-life laws don't offer good support for families who are struggling. This feels hypocritical to me. So again, I don't find pro-life laws useful or helpful. Many conservative Christians are single-issue voters, prioritizing saving the babies by electing pro-life politicians. That makes voting easy, but it doesn't deal with the complications of difficult pregnancies or of life past the womb. I don't think pro-life laws work. I don't think they help people. So what does work? What does help people? I'd like to suggest some big picture guidelines that pro-choice and pro-life people could agree on. What are ways that we reduce abortion without banning it? How can we create healthy and supportive community? How do we reduce unwanted pregnancies? There will always be a need for some abortions, at least until we get technology that magically fixes every problem. Nobody wants there to be lots of abortions. People aren't getting rich from them, and people don't hate babies or hate families. If you're saying these things about other people, it is not true or helpful. There are proven strategies around the world that have reduced abortions. Again, it's one of those unexpected results. The countries that have legal abortions have less abortions than countries who ban them. That isn't the only factor, but it is important to notice. I want to look for things that line up with my faith. Christians like to take wisdom from the Bible. I've assembled some Bible stories here which support proven methods. First, contraception. A lot of people in the pro-life movement are anti-contraception, which is one of the reasons I really can't align myself with the pro-life movement at all. Preventing pregnancy is the best way to prevent abortion. Many stories in the Bible focus on procreation. There are beautiful stories about God's promises for families, and there are sad stories about women who were devalued and rejected because they struggled with infertility. Until recent history, infant mortality was very high. People had a lot of children, hoping that some of them would survive until adulthood. However, humans have always had contraception. Some weren't very effective, but they tried. The Bible actually hints at several early methods in two stories. In Song of Songs, there are mentions of early contraception, including pomegranates, wine, spikenard, and cinnamon. The whole story discusses sex and pleasure without any focus on conception whatsoever. Also in the book of Esther, in the 2nd chapter, Esther gets a year of myrrh as part of her regimen in the harem. Myrrh was used as an early contraception. Having control of her fertility allowed Esther to do an important job for her people and save her community during a dark time. So personally, I don't think that the Bible rejects contraception. With all things, it takes a lot of wisdom and discernment to use the tools that we've been given well. A verse I like about this is 1 John 4:1.
Beloved, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God. For many false prophets have gone out into the world.
We have a lot of misleading information on this subject. We don't want to just assume because a Christian leader said something that means it's true. A major pillar is good sex education. I think sometimes Christians want their kids to remain innocent, and they kind of think they can achieve that by letting their kids be ignorant. But the Bible doesn't recommend ignorance. Proverbs 19:2 says, "Desire without knowledge is not good, and whoever makes haste with his feet misses his way." This one definitely makes me think about teens who are very excited about sex but can rush into bad choices and unsafe situations. Hosea 4:6 says, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I reject you for being a priest to me. And since you've forgotten the law of your God, I will forget your children." I know that sounds very dramatic, but we want to pass on knowledge to the next generation, not abandon them. We have found that a lot of abstinence-only education in Texas and other states actually increases teen pregnancy and STIs. Whereas in Colorado, when they made contraception freely available to teens, the pregnancy rate dropped. Ask yourself, where do I want teens to learn about sex? Of course, good parenting includes teaching your children well, but not all kids have access to good training from their parents. There's a benefit to classroom and community education. If we don't give teens a good education, they are more likely to learn about sex from a romantic partner who might have really bad information or might be intentionally deceiving them. I think that a lot of good sexual education includes understanding one's own body. Psalm 139:14 says, "I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well." Some Christians are taught, directly or indirectly, to be ashamed of their bodies and ashamed of their sexuality. A lot of folks in my generation were taught they lost their value if they lost their virginity. Good sex ed includes good understanding about consent. The Bible has scary stories about sexual abuse and sexual assault. Dinah was raped in Genesis 34, and in 2 Samuel 13, we hear stories about incest and assault with King David's children. People who don't understand sex can get tricked and deceived into unwanted sexual activity, and then they're ashamed and they're scared to talk to anybody about it. A lot of young people, and frankly adults too, think they're entitled to someone else's body just because of their relationship, their clothes, their level of inebriation, or other superficial reasons. We need to teach kids to ask, to communicate clearly, and to respect when others say no. Good sex ed would have good understanding of the mechanics of sex and conception. And it should also teach what is a good and healthy relationship. What is good and healthy communication? 1 Corinthians 13 draws a picture of real love. Patient, kind, not bragging, selfish, or angry, but protective and hopeful. We should be teaching warning signs of unhealthy relationships. Psalm 127:3 says, "Make no friendship with a man given to anger, nor go with a wrathful man, lest you learn his ways and entangle yourself in a snare." So, contraception, sex ed, and the third big picture guideline is about reducing poverty in America. This is a big subject I cannot fully cover in one video. But the reality is that a majority of abortions happen because people are unable to care for another child. Many folks already have children, many are married, Many struggle to meet their basic needs. If they were financially stable, they would be more open to having another child. The Bible has a lot to say about our response to poverty. In Luke 4, Jesus reads from Isaiah, "The Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight to the blind, to set the oppressed free and proclaim the year of the Lord's favor." Proclaiming good news to the poor would be amazing. The United States often proclaims condemnation on the poor instead. We are capable of solving poverty. Jesus considered good news to the poor to be part of his mission. Proverbs 14:21 says that whoever despises his neighbor is a sinner, but blessed is he who is generous to the poor. This verse feels important in a debate where people are yelling at and despising each other. I can read Bible verses all day about how we need to take care of the poor. It is a major theme in the Bible. We can talk all day about justice and how poverty is an injustice. The Bible wants us to balance the scales that are so imbalanced in our world. I would like to think that pro-life and pro-choice people can find common ground in proven reduction practices and be able to show love and care for people who are in difficult circumstances. I would like to be able to continue this conversation. I'm a little worried that I won't be able to, and that this is only going to get negative responses. Yet I want to be a good listener, and I want to value your voice, and I hope you can do the same for me. Have a beautiful day.